in regard to the thoughts that one had, at the time I got the job with my two colleagues to investigate what happened and make recommendations for the future to make sure it didn't happen again. I realized it was a very important, very serious matter for the country. I was pleased also that there was no interference at all. You know, we used to see the president from time to time. That was Mr. Zuma. At no point was any pressure put upon us to make a finding in one direction or another. So, which I think one would like to think that's what normally happens. I'm not sure that it does always happen like that. We were very fortunate in the way it turned out for us. I would like to think that good came from what happened. The matter was dealt with very, very carefully. Normally, enormous amount of time was spent, far longer than in retrospect, one thought it would have happened. But the issues were so important, and there were so many different people from different angles who saw the matter in their own way, that we had to be very careful not to concentrate too much only on one side rather than the other. And it's not for me to judge on the accuracy, the effectiveness of what we did. I think that there were an enormous amount of lessons. And of course, there were three groups of people to be considered. Firstly, there was the police. Did the police handle the matter correctly? The answer is they didn't. We set out in our report very fully what the problems were. And what happened thereafter, of course, a few years later when Mr. Zuma went to prison, and there were riots and 200 people died. And the police did nothing, and when they were questioned about that, they admitted that they did nothing, and they said they did nothing because they didn't want another Marikana. And that was, of course, something that made me very angry, because we went to a lot of trouble to get, we asked the government to appoint a panel of experts, which they did, to investigate modern public order policing practice, which was done. A panel was appointed of people from overseas and local people, independent people and people involved in the police, and they produced an excellent report, hundreds of pages of report with enormous amount of practical information. But nothing was, it wasn't implemented. When they said we didn't want another Marikana, one's response was went to such trouble to ensure there wouldn't be another Marikana that it was very disappointing. But I think after that, the lesson must to some extent have been learnt. I must say also that which is also relevant to what we are talking about this morning, was that one of the reasons that was given, I understand, for the fact that they hadn't implemented our report, despite the fact that they said they would, was there weren't funds for it. And sometimes there are false economies, and this certainly was a massive false economy. But I said the various people approach aspects, problems that one has to consider. The next one was the employers. The employers, there's no doubt about it that the Lonman people messed up, and we set out in our report why we said that. They messed up. But as far as I can make out, that that sort of thing hasn't happened since then. So looking at what happened over the 10 years, I suppose, from then, that the lesson for the employers has been learnt, and that's a cause for gratitude, actually, on the part of everybody. The third group, of course, was the workers, the employees. Now, they had set out, they were striking, they wanted to bring pressure to bear on the employer for more money, and they were quite happy to intimidate some of their colleagues to ensure that they would participate in the strike. And that's where the problem began. Before the police arrived on the scene, there were already murders, employees who were murdered because they wouldn't take part in the strike. And that was a lesson which I hope, and I think one can say the hope's been satisfied, that the employees also will realize there are serious consequences if they try by murder and intimidation. We used to talk about murder and mayhem when we were thinking about it, that that sort of behavior doesn't help anybody. In fact, it just leads to further trouble. Yes, no, there are a number of thoughts one has. One of the ones that makes me angry again when I think about it was the police lied to us originally, and we set out fully in the report what they did in that regard. But there were also a couple of facts that we could never get the answer to. The problem started essentially on the Friday beforehand, and the first murders were on the Sunday. There were other people who were murdered subsequently, and of course the major events were on the Thursday. Now, one of the reasons why the problems that we encountered took place on the Thursday was the police acted totally inappropriately. They had a plan which they had worked out to solve the problem of the strike and the violence. But I won't give you details, but it was quite clear the plan they had, which the overseas experts were quite happy with, was it had to be implemented early in the morning when the number of strikers was much smaller than ultimately. Ultimately, there were 2,000 or 3,000, but there were about, I think, 50 was the number of people who were at the scene early on the Thursday morning. We, for reasons that I didn't have to enlarge on, there were various delays in the course of the day, and they could only move over to action at about 3:30 in the afternoon when there were about 3,000 or 4,000 people on the scene. It was absolutely impossible to implement the plan that they tried to implement without bloodshed. And they anticipated that there might well be bloodshed, but nevertheless they carried on. What we couldn't understand was when there were the delays on the Thursday, why they didn't just postpone the matter until the Friday. And we kept on asking the question. The question was, why Thursday? And we never got an answer. And I've still not to this day found out what the reason was.